Welcome to The Thriving Mama, the podcast that teaches you not just how to survive, but to thrive in motherhood. I'm your host, Dr. Stephanie Davis. Today, we're going to be touching on a very sensitive subject, and I just want to preface people with that. So this is a warning. It might be a trigger for you, but we're going to be talking about body weight in the context of an emotional suit of armor. And I would say this topic is near and dear to my heart, but because after I had my miscarriages, this was something that I battled with. And it is something that countless numbers of my patients, my functional medicine patients, but many of my thriving mama clients, they also have struggled with this too. And it's not something that we talk about very often. People love to talk about, your diet, and that's valid. And they like to talk about moving your body and sleep and all of the lifestyle factors. And that's actually something I'm going to be getting into in some future podcast episodes, more in relationship to blood sugar. But this context where we talk about weight as a suit of armor or protection is very different. And it is not metabolic. It does not respond to your traditional remedies like we just spoke about, like addressing your blood sugar and diet and exercise and sleep and all of the things that you hear about constantly. And so I was thinking about it because I just had a conversation with one of my thriving mamas, and I had been thinking about it. And so I decided to dive into it with you all today. And so in this episode, we're going to be talking about how your weight might be tied to your trauma and emotions, the 3 things that I look for to help determine that factor, and the most effective way to address it. Want to chat and get more personalized support? I'm offering podcast listeners a free 20-minute Thriving Mama check-in where we'll evaluate your physical, mental, and emotional health and provide useful resources to help you along your journey. You'll find that link in the show notes. So when I am working with somebody and one of their top concerns is their weight. And unfortunately for women, weight tends to be a very kind of, I would say, top of mind, very present issue because of all of the messages that were sent societally. You're supposed to look a certain way, thinner is better. There's all sorts of themes that we are pumped, constantly from, the regular media, social media. I'd say relatives are a source of this. I can't tell you how many times I've been at family functions and there's the little whisperings of, oh, well, so-and-so has gained weight. It's usually gained weight. Occasionally you'll say, well, so-and-so, you'll hear, well, so-and-so looks really skinny. I wonder what happened to them, or what they did. So the weight is one of those topics that seems to garner a lot of attention in modern society. And I don't love it because it sends messages to women, especially, that we're not good enough. And we already get enough of that. So, I'm in the ballpark of forget that. And it was interesting. And I'll share my story first, but I know if you've been a longtime podcast listener, you know that I had 2 miscarriages in between my kids. And when I had those miscarriages, something changed. I know we've talked a lot about that, but something changed inside of me. And I think it was, I know because of all the work, the inner work and emotional work I've done and what I've been taught is, that feeling of I'm not worthy or I'm not good enough. For me, it was the I'm not good enough. My body isn't good enough. It wasn't healthy enough to hold a baby. It wasn't, there, all of the things that kind of come along with that idea. And so after I had both of my kids, my weight returned within 10 pounds of my normal weight, which I was pretty happy with. I did not put a ton of stock into like returning to, kind of pre-baby weight. I wanted to get to a healthy weight, but I knew that my body was going to change and I was giving myself grace. What happened in between the two, I did not expect though. At one point, like it just seemed like the weight was creeping up and I did nothing different. Sleeping the same. I was eating the same, a healthy kind of whole foods diet, moving. I've always kind of been, more prone to working out. So I was doing all the right things, but the weight just kept on creeping on. And then I would say before I got pregnant with my daughter, it was probably in the ballpark of maybe 5 extra pounds. But so I nursed her for a year. And then my body weight, like I said, again, was kind of within that 10-pound range of my like lifetime normal. And then we moved and I had a ton of stress, and that stress, I think, just compounded some of the emotional underlying, causes of why I was, kind of gaining weight. And it was interesting because once we moved from Minnesota back to Colorado, and my weight just kept on kind of creeping up and creeping up. And then I noticed it was like 10 pounds and then 20 pounds and then 30 pounds. And at the most, it was, let me see here, I think it was in the ballpark of 50 pounds. And I was like, oh my gosh, what happened? And it was interesting because I just, like I said, was doing all of the same things. I will say that I was probably eating more carbs, which made sense because I was under a lot of stress. And when we're under a lot of stress, we tend to eat a lot of carbs. And so that is what happened to me. And I was just beyond frustrated. I tried so many things. I changed my diet in lots of ways. I changed my workout routine in lots of ways. And I was getting stronger and my body was getting more fit, but the number on the scale wasn't changing. And I am not saying to be an advocate for that number, but it was super interesting to me. And I made a mental note of the fact that the number didn't change. I was definitely stronger, definitely had more muscle tone, but that number wasn't changing. And that's something that we'll talk about in a little bit, because I think there's definitely something to that. And so there are some things when I'm working with somebody and we're trying to kind of figure out, what is the root cause of the weight gain. So there are 3 things that I look for typically when I'm doing a history with somebody, whether it's in the functional medicine realm or if it's on the emotional side, or if we're combining the two together. Like we do in the Thriving Mama program. There's a typical phrase that I said for myself that I hear every woman say, and it's, I do all the right things. So these are people who are aware of their diet and they're aware of the lifestyle factors like getting enough sleep and exercising and moving their body and hydration and, getting exposed to sunlight, all of the things, sleep, circadian rhythm, all of that. They're aware. They're doing all the right things, but the weight won't move. They'll also say, like I mentioned, exercise. I exercise and the scale doesn't budge. That's usually a telltale sign for me that the weight is more protective and it's a suit of armor. The next one is if you are, again, like 25 to 30 pounds overweight, it's typically not something that's metabolic. It's not, usually directly tied to the blood sugar. It's not due to those lifestyle factors. It is typically something in the emotional realm. And I know I have colleagues that would refute that, but I have seen and I have talked to other colleagues who have said, they've seen these patients who, despite doing all the right things, just can't lose weight. But they also are not trained in the trauma and emotional realm like I am. And so I've seen this and I've seen what happens when we address the emotional root causes. The weight comes off. So it's super interesting. It's one of those things that those of us who are trauma informed and know about like how the emotions regulate, how kind of regulate what goes on in your body and that cellular response. Those of us who are aware, and some other practitioners are not aware. So it's not necessarily a fault of theirs. It's just, kind of what your education is and what your paradigm is. And the third thing that I look for on the history, or I'll hear women say, is food is comfort to them. Like if they're stressed out, I want dark chocolate. If I'm stressed out, I want to eat, salty, crunchy carbs. That's a common thing that I hear. And that was kind of my thing. I'm not really a sweet tooth, but if I was really stressed out, I was like, give me some some chips or some nuts or something that is salty and carby. So, and that makes sense because it supports your adrenal glands. That salty kind of carby function will be supportive to your adrenals, but not necessarily, good for blood sugar handling. And, that also can contribute to it. And another thing I wanted to mention was a lot of, and I touched on this before, a lot of women will also say that there's like a magic number that their body wants to stay at. And it's really interesting because I experienced this too. So what would happen is, like I mentioned, trying all these different things like diet and weight training. And I tried, things like keto, and I tried variations of like high protein, but my weight would I'd lose weight and then I would come back to that one set point. It was very interesting because I hear that probably 50% out of the time from these women. So there are some little hints that maybe if you look for yourself, that might point to, your weight gain being more like we said, that support or that suit of armor that protects you. And it makes sense. It's literally making an insulation or a physical barrier to the external environment. And typically traumas come from the external sources, right? Like we've talked about in many episodes before, trauma, it is typically, it could be something significant. Like when we talked about the big T traumas, like either sexual abuse or physical abuse or verbal abuse. There's lots of ways that the big T traumas happen, or a major accident, or you could have lots of those little T traumas. Maybe you were made fun of as a child. Maybe it was your weight that was poked fun of. That absolutely makes sense that you would, build up this suit of armor to protect yourself. And so much of it comes from these programs, the I'm not worthy and I'm not good enough. I don't like that. I don't love myself. There is a list that I use with women, especially, but, all of my patients, to try to discern where those major pain points are. And that's something that, when I'm working with people, we kind of get into, and like, that's what we would call your dominant thought. And I was just going the biggest thing that we do is look for those dominant thoughts. And those dominant thoughts, it's not what you're thinking all the time. The things like, oh, I've got to lose weight, or I'm not good enough, like for this job, or I'm not good enough to be this person's partner. Those types of things. Those are actually your non-dominant thoughts. Your dominant thoughts are the ones that are in the subconscious realm. And I know that word is thrown around a lot now, especially like it, just like trauma, but it's those thoughts that we are unconscious of, the thoughts and programs that were planted from 0 to 5 years old that guide and control everything in our lives. And we need to access those and change those in order for the weight to come off. I am very hopeful that I'm going to have one of my longtime patients and a thriving mama come on and talk about her story, because she is a classic example of how this has affected her life. And I'm really hoping that she comes on and shares her story, because I feel like she gives people hope, and she beautifully describes and articulates her process. And so that's something that I'm just wanted to plant the seed so that you guys all know and you guys hear, because I think that we've been talking about it, and I think she's going to do it. So that episode would be airing probably not next month, but it would end up being the month after. So super, super excited for her to share her story. But I was going to dive a little bit more into the hows. So how do we resolve this? The dominant thoughts are number one. We identify the dominant thoughts, and then we do the work. And so that, in my world, involves kind of creating a safe space. When we're doing the trauma work, we create a safe space so that if you're ever feeling stressed out or unsafe in the process, you can go back there. Then we slowly work on your nervous system. And we do this in many ways with many different techniques, but we warm it up. And then our whole goal is to get to the root cause or the initial sensitizing event. And when we get to that event, one of two things typically happen. Your subconscious and nervous system let us in, and we can resolve it there. But lots of times it puts up a wall or a roadblock and says, we're not doing this now. And so then we have to be gentle, and we have to ask, is this something your mind wants to, or is something that you, not even just your mind, but do you want to go there now? And if your body says no, that's okay. We can stop and we can go back another day. We have to make it so that you feel safe and comfortable. And then once we get there, we rewrite the story. And that is a very, very powerful way to overcome this suit of armor. And once this happens, it literally changes your body on a cellular level. I know in the past, we've talked about, the molecules of emotion. That's Candace Pert's work, but how your bodies retain cellular memory. And when we retain those cellular memories, that's where your trauma goes. And when we are working, we're looking for that in your body. That's why one of the processes that I do is I have you point to where it is in your body, because we're working on that memory. So once we tackle and address that memory, the suit melts. And I can't tell you the number of women I've worked with that was the key. That was the answer. And that was myself included. I did all of the right things and I could not get my weight to budge, even though my whole adult life until I had children, and remember, I had my kids late 30s and early 40s, my whole adult life, I was the same way until all of this happened. And so my takeaway for you is that you could be doing all the right things and they may not be working. And if that is the case, you need to look at the emotional and kind of traumatic and maybe even spiritual side of things, because it's likely that your body is holding on to that weight to you. It's, like I said, acting as a suit of armor. But with some gentle care and work, that can be changed and remedied. If you made it this far, I truly appreciate you. Remember, knowledge is just the beginning. Taking action is what truly sparks change. If you're overwhelmed and don't have enough energy to make it through the day, I invite you to book a free 20-minute coaching call with me. It's a no-obligation chat where we can discuss your health goals and how I might be able to help you achieve them. Visit the link in the episode description to book that call. Until next time, keep striving for wellness, and remember, you have the power to not just survive, but thrive in motherhood.